So the first thing that happened this morning was that my new passport arrived, and it's also the day in which Theresa May sent the letter triggering Article 50 to stimulate the Brexit, the beginning of the 2-year Brexit process. So that passport that came is going to be the last one that I own, probably, that has the words European Union emblazoned on the front of it. This is a new thing for me, this idea of a blog that reflects my ideas that occur to me as I cycle to and from work. And this first one is really kind of triggered by that idea of Brexit, and also a radio program that was on last week on Radio 4 called The Moral Maze with Michael Burke, which was about the idea of nationalism, and they were talking about the fact that Trump, European nationalism developing, the idea of Brexit, and also that Theresa May had been aiming at stopping the devolved nations splitting away from the United Kingdom. The idea of this program is that they get various people in to talk about this subject matter. They've got 4 kind of normal hosts, and they bring in sort of guest speakers who are experts in the subject area. And so one of the themes that kept emerging out of this was the idea of multiculturalism, which is symbolically represented here by these 2 ladies crossing the road on my journey into work. One of the witnesses in the programme was Hardeep Singh Kohli, who is a Scottish nationalist supporter, and so it was interesting to hear him talking about commonalities and civic nationalism, and he was saying there was hope rising in Scotland and that they were engaged in what he called an inclusive nationalism, and that he talked about Sturgeon looking to include cultural diversity into this nationalism, but he also mentioned the idea of restoring the nation to where it once was, to demonstrate how it can be done, a beacon of civic nationalism. So that idea of having to have some kind of homogeneity, a mainstream, in order to create a nationalism, you've got to have a nationality. Someone else in the Mona Siddiqui in the program said, I was asking who defines what solid British culture is, and that David Conway, one of the speakers, was saying that nationalism needs a dominant national culture in order to define itself. And that's an interesting question about whether nationalism can be inclusive. And I think the idea of community, of having something in common with other people. They were discussing whether poorer people might have more in common, no matter where they are geographically, than people who are Scottish might have in common. Some people living in a Glasgow estate and others living in a expensive country estate, whether they have more in common than people living in different cities who are in the same sort of socio-economic situation. And that idea of sort of fitting in, of feeling part of something or not being able to fit in. I mean, you've got a load of very non-conformist people in this set of boats that we're passing along next to here. I mean, this person can't even fit inside their boat, let alone fit inside a society. And a little bit further on, we've got people whose furniture can't fit inside their boat, let alone fit inside society. I found it interesting that they seem to find the idea of the nation state was entirely established, and that self-governance can only happen through the nation state. That was, I think, Claire Fox who was saying that in the programme. and that the nation state as an idea was an unproblematic kind of unit of nationalism, and that things like supranational institutions were the problematic thing. And yet, that idea of supranational is really the way that the United Kingdom works. We are a series of very small nation states that have been stitched together, and we've been stitched together for a long time now. So the others have had to exist within it. The former Soviet bloc is often kind of described as a kind of self-evident sphere of influence for Russia, that it's somehow right and proper for them to still be worried about what happens in Eastern Europe. And yet these were nation states, presumably, and Russia was an empire with a supranational institution, which is, I guess, one of the definitions of an empire. And obviously Britain still lives with that legacy of being a supranational institution, of having this gigantic empire that stretched around the world. And yet we are so very concerned that the nation state has now become the important thing, whereas it wasn't very long ago that we were so concerned about maintaining these larger institutions. Look, Greece. The one thing that wasn't really discussed, I don't think, was the notion of power and the way that makes such a fundamental difference. I mean, nationalism, but it's also true of racism and sexism, that if you are the individual or group within this social activity who has the power, then it means a very different thing than if you try to exert a kind of exclusivity based from a position of not having any power. So that very notion of power is what makes the fundamental difference between Trump's style of nationalism and Scotland's style of nationalism, in that in the same way that when white people are racist, it means a very different thing than if black people are racist towards white people. They may make judgments based on that person's race, but the fact that they're not doing so from a position of power makes what they do very different in a functional sense. It may show the same kind of arbitrary faction-based decisions about your loyalty or your ascription of attributes that are other than the thing that you're looking at, whether it's national characteristics or racial characteristics or gender characteristics. Power is very important in the world of nationalism because it makes the difference between oppression and rebellion. Well, here's a very odd traffic cone to finish with.